There are roughly 12,200 nuclear weapons in the world, held by 9 countries and stored across 15 countries. As the region gets more volatile, one question keeps resurfacing. Should Australia acquire nuclear weapons? Many of you have asked me this in DMs and direct messages, and it's thanks to Shallow Chow that I've made a video on this one. Could nuclear weapons promise the ultimate deterrence or make us less safe? And if Australia decided we did want to acquire nukes, would we even be able to? Let's take a look at whether or not Australia should acquire nuclear weapons. I'm Mel Pikos, and today we're talking tactics. Setting the scene. Australia today faces one of the most complex security environments in its history. The region is now defined by competition between the United States and China. For most of the 20th century, Australia's defence policy was shaped by fear of abandonment, the idea that if a major war broke out, we'd be left to defend ourselves. During World War II, that fear became real. The fall of Singapore and the bombing of Darwin showed that the British Empire couldn't protect us. So we turned to the United States. That alliance has become the cornerstone of Australian defence strategy, and with it came something else: nuclear deterrence. Through the ANZUS alliance and the broader US nuclear umbrella, Australia has long benefited from the protection of American strategic forces without ever needing its own bombs. But now, with China rapidly expanding its arsenal, North Korea testing new weapons, and questions about how reliable US deterrence might be in the decades ahead, the nuclear question is resurfacing. Could Australia one day decide it needs its own nuclear weapons to stay safe? I want to let you know my opinion, but let's look at a few arguments first in the affirmative and in the negative, and discuss whether it would even be possible. The case for Aussie Nukes. There are a number of arguments for Australia to nuke up. The main one is deterrence. Nuclear weapons are the ultimate insurance policy. If you've got them, no one's invading. An independent arsenal would make any potential aggressor think twice before even considering military action. Then there's strategic independence. Right now, Australia relies on the US nuclear umbrella. But what if that umbrella folds? Having our own nukes would mean we don't have to depend on Washington's willingness to step in. We'd be in charge of our own deterrence. There's also regional prestige and bargaining power. Nuclear weapons come with status and leverage both in diplomacy and in a crisis. And then there's the industrial argument. Building a nuclear weapons program would mean huge investment in science, engineering, and manufacturing. It would be a massive upskilling of our workforce, not only in a nuclear industry, but in related and complementary industries. So what about the case against? Well, there's actually a number of barriers that would impede Australia from acquiring nuclear weapons. The legal barriers. Before Australia could even think about building nuclear weapons, it would hit a wall of legal and political barriers. The biggest one is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. It's the cornerstone of global nuclear control, which Australia signed back in 1970, promising never to develop or acquire nuclear weapons. In return, the 5 nuclear powers agreed to move toward disarmament and to help non-nuclear countries access peaceful nuclear technology. As one of the treaty's most active supporters, breaking that promise wouldn't just be controversial, it would be a direct violation of international law. And that's not the only obstacle. Domestically, Australian law makes it nearly impossible to start a weapons program. Federal and state regulations strictly control every part of the nuclear supply chain, from uranium exports to the use of nuclear materials and facilities. Even activities that could hint at weapons development would require massive legal changes, new agencies, and years of political wrangling. Just look at the political quagmire that Peter Dutton found himself in before the last election when suggesting nuclear power plants. States around the country pushed back hard on that, so it wouldn't be hard to imagine fierce resistance if nuclear weapons development was suggested in any state. Turning away from the NPT would mean walking away from 50 years of diplomacy, undermining our credibility on arms control, and potentially facing international sanctions or isolation. The practical barriers. If you strip away the policies, the nuts and bolts of building a nuclear weapons program are brutally hard. It's not just building a bomb, but building an entire industrial ecosystem to design, produce, store, deliver nuclear warheads safely and reliably. That means facilities for uranium processing and enrichment, warhead engineering and manufacturing, high precision delivery systems such as ballistic missiles or specifically adapted aircraft, secure test and validation infrastructure, hardened command, control, and safety systems. Each step requires specialist engineers, weapons physicists, ordnance experts, materials scientists, and a trained industrial workforce that takes years, if not decades, to develop. Recruiting the talent would be costly and politically fraught. Training pipelines in universities and industry would have to be created from scratch or poached from overseas. None of that exists here today. Australia's existing nuclear footprint is civilian only. There's just one nuclear reactor in the country and it's used for scientific research only. The financial and time costs are enormous. Even optimistic estimates by external analysts put a realistic timeline at a decade or more before a credible deliverable arsenal would exist, and that is only if the program had uninterrupted political will, contractors, and massive funding. The price tag would run into many tens of billions of dollars, and once you count delivery systems, sustainment, secure infrastructure, and the hidden costs of redundancy and safety, the bill can quickly escalate toward a scale that reshapes defence and public spending priorities. Are we better off spending that money on something else? There are practical risks beyond cost and time. Building enrichment and weapons facilities creates proliferation and safety hazards that must be defended 24/7. Supply chains for specialised components are fragile and subject to international controls. And finally, the opportunity cost is huge. Money and technical talent diverted into a weapons program cannot be spent on conventional capabilities, resilience, cyber, intelligence, or social services that are also a matter for national security. In short, the technical, industrial, and human hurdles make a domestic nuclear weapons program not just expensive, but slow, risky, and disruptive to the fabric of Australian defence and society. The strategic barriers. If Australia decided to develop nuclear weapons, the strategic fallout would be immediate and severe. The first ripple would come from our neighbours. Countries across Southeast Asia and the Pacific would likely react with alarm, and not just rhetorically, but with real policy shifts. Indonesia, the Philippines, and others would face strong domestic pressure to speed up their own capabilities or deepen foreign security arrangements. Japan and South Korea might feel compelled to reconsider their long-standing non-nuclear postures. Nuclear testing or even suspected testing would trigger instant diplomatic and economic penalties. Allied relations would not be immune either. Australia's closest partners could view a unilateral nuclear move as reckless or destabilising, complicating intelligence sharing, defence cooperation, and diplomatic support. Economic consequences could be very dramatic. Sanctions, reduced foreign direct investment, trade restrictions, and higher borrowing costs are all feasible responses, and they would hit an export-dependent economy like Australia's very hard. Even financial uncertainty alone could undermine the capacity to fund other critical defence programs that a nuclear option supposedly aims to protect. There are also immediate operational and security dilemmas. Nuclear forces require secure command and control, fail-safe protocols, and continuous political oversight. Creating a credible deterrent implies credible decision processes that survive through crises. That raises questions about civilian control, accidental escalation, and the risk of sabotage or espionage against facilities that would have to be defended 24/7. In a region already crowded with military assets, the presence of nuclear infrastructure becomes a tempting target during any heightened tension. Finally, considering Australia has been a leading voice in non-proliferation and regional stability, becoming a proliferator would erode Australia's diplomatic capital, reduce its leverage on arms control initiatives, and make cooperative security harder at a time when it is most needed. It would also make cruder forms of coercion more likely as states learn to threaten escalation with simpler conventional measures backed by the fear of nuclear retaliation. Put simply, acquiring nuclear weapons could trade a short-term sense of security for long-term regional instability, diplomatic isolation, and economic risk. The strategic challenge would not just be building bombs, but also managing a world that reacts badly to the moment you cross that line. What alternative weapons could we get? Nuclear weapons are not the only path to credible deterrence. In fact, Australia already stands on several practical and legal options that together form a robust, layered defence posture. Under AUKUS and through close ties with Washington, Australia benefits from the US nuclear umbrella and integrated planning. That alliance relationship is the core insurance policy most middle powers like Australia rely on, and it remains politically and legally sustainable in a way an independent bomb is not. Australia's immediate and legally clear step toward harder deterrence is the AUKUS submarine program. Canberra plans to operate a mix of US-built Virginia-class boats delivered from the early 2030s and a domestically built SSN AUKUS fleet by the early 2040s, giving the Royal Australian Navy stealthy, long-endurance platforms that can patrol far from home and carry conventionally armed cruise missiles like the Tomahawk cruise missile if required. They are stealthy, persistent, and capable of operating far from home for long periods. That gives Australia a powerful underwater deterrent without violating the Non-Proliferation Treaty. There is an ongoing policy conversation about complementary long-range strike options from the air as well. I've previously floated the idea of Australia acquiring conventionally armed B-21 Raider bombers as a sovereign long-range strike capability. They have incredible stealth and their range would deliver rapid strategic reach. Buying B-21s would be costly and politically complex, but I think the B-21 option remains a good way to boost deterrence without crossing the nuclear threshold. We are also entering the age of drones. Platforms like the Ghost Shark undersea drone and Ghostbat combat aircraft multiply force projection at a fraction of the cost and risk of crewed systems. They can hold sea lanes, gather intelligence, and complicate an adversary's targeting picture while keeping sailors and pilots out of harm's way. Beyond allies and submarines, advanced conventional deterrence can do a lot of the heavy lifting. You can also use them. Long-range strike systems such as the Tomahawk cruise missiles and anti-ship weapons like the LRASM extend the reach of the ADF, making any potential aggressor think twice about approaching. Finally, diplomatic deterrence matters. Deepening ties through ASEAN, the Quad, and closer Pacific partnerships builds regional resilience. Cooperation on intelligence, logistics, and critical supply chains amplifies military capability without resorting to weapons of mass destruction. Put together, these tools offer a practical, immediate, and legally compliant alternative to national nuclear weapons. We already have the means to deter aggression, and they don't glow in the dark. To nuke or not to nuke? So, should Australia go nuclear? I don't think so. Building our own nuclear weapons would be slow, expensive, and politically disastrous. It would break treaties, isolate us from our allies, and probably spark an arms race in our region. We definitely don't want that. And for what? The marginal gain in deterrence just isn't worth the cost, because you never actually really use any of these weapons, or at least the intention is not to use them. Instead, Australia already has better tools on the table. Strengthen our strategic partnerships through AUKUS, the Quad, and ASEAN. Acquire B-21 Raiders. Invest in conventionally armed long-range systems like Tomahawks, and double down on emerging tech like the Ghost Shark and autonomous systems that give us reach and flexibility without crossing nuclear red lines. Australia doesn't need to go nuclear to stay safe. We just need to be smart about the capabilities we build and the alliances we keep. But what do you think? Is it time for Australia to take the nuclear option seriously, or are we stronger sticking with the path we're on? That's it for today. I'm Pikos, and we've been talking tactics.